Everyone, and welcome back to my channel. Today's video will be my September and October wrap up. In the last 2 months, I read a total of 9 books. I read 3 in September and 6 in October. I kind of had one soft DNF, which I will talk about at the end. But overall, I had a really good October, especially. I read a lot in October and I was in my fantasy era. I read a lot of fantasy except for one book. Everything else was fantasy. I gave out some 5 stars. I gave out some 4 stars. I feel like in general, the last 2 months were kind of picking up for me, and I was reading a lot of really good books and stuff that I really enjoyed, and I'm hoping to keep that energy for November and December. So let's get into the wrap up. I'm going to start with the books I read in September. And of course, I'm going to be referencing my reading journal because this really helps me keep track of everything that I've read and my thoughts and a proper summary for every book. So the first book I read was Halfling by S.E. Wendell, and this I gave 3 out of 5 stars. Half orc, half human, Auric has been trying to prove himself to a clan that despises him. Stumbling upon a kidnapped human, Auric frees her knowing this will betray his clan. Auric decides to help, I think it's Sorsha, find her way home, and along the journey, hopefully Auric can find where he truly belongs. I really enjoyed this, but I definitely thought it was way too long. I liked the slow friends to lovers romance that was going on. I feel like they had a very kind of innocent, wholesome romance. They definitely cared about each other so deeply, which I found very refreshing to read about. I enjoyed the world building. I feel like there was some great world building around this orc clan and just the whole vibe and setting of the book, like kind of like in a kingdom, I guess. I definitely felt the tension between them the entire book, and I was waiting for them to kiss. Like I was just like waiting for it to happen. It definitely took longer than I liked, but I feel like it really built up their relationship and the romance. They also had a very cute pet raccoon, which was so adorable. I loved that little aspect. Like they had their own little family. A lot of this book takes place on their journey back to Sorsha's family, so it's kind of dragged at parts, and I definitely felt a little bit bored when they finally got to Sorsha's family, that I was just kind of waiting for it to end, and I feel like the ending kind of dragged a little bit, but overall it was enjoyable, and I love this cover. I think it's gorgeous. And then I read one of my new favorite books, definitely one of my favorite books of the year, and that is Immortal Dark by Tejas Girma. This I gave 5 out of 5 stars. I loved this book so much. A lost heiress must infiltrate an arcane society and live with the vampire she suspects killed her family and kidnapped her sister. I loved everything about this book. Obviously, it is dark academia. It features vampires. It is also young adult, but it doesn't feel like it's super young adult. Like I felt like the characters were a lot older. I do believe that Kidan is 18 or 19. I think she might be 19. She goes to this university and she is trying to find answers about her sister and her family, and she has to live with a vampire that is set to her family and like her family's name and like house. It's very complicated to like explain this book, but essentially there is a bunch of families, kind of like founding families in this university and this like little town, I guess, and each family has like a vampire assigned to the family, and most vampires have been with that specific family for years, and it's just to kind of have peace between the vampires and the humans. I believe each house within the families is magical, and each house has a house law that the inheritor must learn, and they have to learn it like through the house and like figure out what the house wants and like to protect the house, to protect the family. Obviously, Kidan is very suspicious of the vampire that is in her house because they both essentially want to kill each other. Like they are not shy that they do not like each other. They want to kill each other. They want to frame each other for things. It's very dramatic. It's very suspenseful. There's so much going on in this book. I feel like every few chapters there was like some sort of revelation, and I just feel like it was so interesting, and the world was just so creative and unique, and I felt like the author truly built a backstory for every single character and all of the families and the history, and there was just so many interesting things about this book. I loved Katie Ann. I thought she was a fantastic heroine, and I loved the very slow enemies to lovers subplot going on. That was just wonderful. I'm so excited to see how that develops in the second book. Susenyos, I think that's how you say his name, Susenyos. I loved him. I loved him. He was so interesting. I love how he was so secretive. I loved the house law. I loved the secrets of the house. I loved everything about this book. I highly, highly recommend. This was just a fantastic book, and I loved it. And I'm so excited for the next book. Immortal Dark kind of reignited my love for vampires, so I then went on a vampire kind of hunt for books. So I read The Serpent and the Wings of Night by Carissa Broadbent. This is the first book in the Nightborn duet, and this I gave 4 out of 5 stars. The adopted human daughter of the Nightborn king, Araya, has been trained to kill. Her only chance at gaining real power is to win a legendary tournament, but winning won't be easy against vicious vampires. To survive, Araya is forced to make an alliance with Rayhan, a dangerous and mysterious rival vampire. I don't know if I'm saying his name right. Rayhan, I think. This was really interesting and fun and very unique. I was a little confused by not necessarily the world building, but all of the different vampires and like houses, and like that was a little confusing to me. Luckily there is a glossary in here, so I was kind of referring to that a lot. I felt kind of confused. I'm still slightly confused, even though I'm reading the second book right now. I wasn't as obsessed with the romance as I thought it was going to be. Like, I really thought I was going to love the romance, but it was okay for me. Like, I wasn't super into it. I actually enjoyed the like competition / like trials that Araya had to go through. I feel like it's very reminiscent of the Hunger Games, and I don't know, I liked that aspect. The ending of this book was just like shocking. I did not see any of that coming. Like, that totally threw me for a loop. I feel like the end was just insane, but when I finished this, I wasn't initially intrigued enough to read the second book, and I was kind of like, nah, I'm good. Like, I'll just read this first book and that's okay. I was like, I don't want to waste $40 on reading the sequel when I could just like read spoilers and just be fine with it. But the more I thought about it, the more I was like, no, I want to read the second book. So I ended up buying the second book, and I'm currently reading, and yeah, I really enjoyed this. It was fun, it was entertaining, but I'm not like super obsessed with it. But I feel like if you maybe are new to fantasy, or if you want to read a very interesting yet not super complex, action-packed romantasy, like, I do recommend this book. And if you love vampire stories, I recommend this as well. I continued my vampire phase with King of Battle and Blood by Scarlett St. Clair. This is the first book in the Adrienne and Isolde series. I think that's how you pronounce her name. I feel like I'm butchering it. Isolde. I don't know. This I gave 3 out of 5 stars. To end a years-long war, Isolde is to marry Vampire King Adrian and kill him. This was really fun. I feel like the story was really fast-paced. It kept me wanting to read. I feel like in general the vampire system in here was pretty basic, but it definitely worked for me in the moment and what I wanted out of, you know, like a quick vampire story. This was definitely very smutty, but I honestly expected it to be a little bit more smuttier than it was, if that makes sense. I feel like there was kind of a plot twist in here, which was a little predictable. I feel like the author gave way too many hints, and it just became very obvious what was going to happen. The romance was really fun, but I wasn't obsessed with the romance or the characters. I do like how Adrian was very much in love with her, and he definitely fell first. I did like how Isolde was very strong, very independent. She definitely stood up for herself a lot and she was ready to fight. I just feel like it was kind of lacking on the character development and the romance and the world building, and it just kind of lacked in all areas for me. So sadly, I just didn't love this. And then the next 3 books I read for a reading vlog, so I will link that vlog down below. The first book I read was Phantasma by Kaylee Smith. I gave this 3 out of 5 stars. After her mother's death, Ophelia is set to take on the family business. However, their home is in debt, and Ophelia's sister decides to pay it off by entering Phantasma, a deadly competition that grants the winner a single wish. Ophelia enters Phantasma to find her sister, and while participating in the games, Ophelia is protected and guided by this mysterious ghost. This was very interesting. It felt very original. It felt like nothing I've read before. It had this kind of gothic horror vibes to it. Definitely perfect for spooky season. It had a lot more sex scenes than I thought it was gonna have, to be honest. Like, it definitely was quite smutty. I liked Ophelia, but I kind of felt that there was a lack of build on her relationship with her sister. The point of her entering this competition is to save her sister and find her sister, and I was like, I don't really care about your sister. Like, why am I supposed to care about her when I felt like we didn't really see a full relationship between them? I really wish the sister bond was built on a little bit more. I also just couldn't really connect to the romance. I was very suspicious of Blackwell the entire time. Like, I just didn't really know if I should trust him because he's like this ghost kind of trapped there. And like, I didn't really know how I should feel about him, but Ophelia was like falling in love with him, and I just couldn't connect to them because I felt like more was going on, and Blackwell was very secretive, so I felt like I couldn't really trust him. I was like, I don't know what's going on. And I felt like also there was a lack of relationship building between Blackwell and Ophelia. Like, I just felt like there was no real emotional connection. Like, they just didn't really talk about things. Like, it was just like he was there protecting her in the games, and she was just talking about like her missing sister, and then like they would just have sex, and that was kind of it. Like, I felt like there was no real emotional connection and build between them. I also found that it was hard for me to visualize the games and visualize the trials and stuff. I don't know if that was just a me thing or if like the author wasn't fully describing things properly, but I found it really hard to like imagine what was actually happening. But yeah, it was gory. It was kind of like horror vibes, like I said, which was interesting and not what I expected. The ending was definitely interesting. I feel like I really understood like what was going on in the ending, and like everything kind of became clear for me, but I do think that was an interesting plot twist, but I also feel like there was just not a lot built for that to be the ending, if that makes sense. I thought it was entertaining. It was fun, kept me on the edge of my seat during some of the games, but overall, I just didn't love it as much as I thought I would, and I'm not going to read the second book. In that same vlog, I also read Morbidly Yours by Ivy Fairbanks, and this I gave 4 out of 5 stars. Callum can only inherit the family undertaking business under one condition. He must marry before his 35th birthday, but he has no interest in dating. Lark has moved in next door to Callum, and they strike up an easy friendship as Lark deals with a new job and grieving the loss of her husband. Callum shares his dilemma, and Lark gets on the mission to help him find the one. This was very sweet and cute and heartfelt. I really liked both characters. It kind of gave a little bit of grumpy sunshine. They also had some great character development, like separately, which I really enjoyed. They kind of brought out the best of each other and helped each other kind of grow, and they just developed a very beautiful relationship from their friendship. There were a couple of conversations about death and grief, and I feel like that added a depth to this book, which I really enjoyed. But kind of towards the end of the story, I felt like there were so many kind of bad things happening all at once. It just felt very overwhelming towards the end when like all of these bad things were kind of piling up. I enjoyed the setting of this book. It takes place in Ireland, and I felt like the author did a great job with the setting and the overall vibe of the book, and I really enjoyed all of the like Irish slang and pronunciations and everything, and there is kind of a guide towards the end as well, which I liked. It was just a lovely story about 2 characters falling in love after loss and taking chances. Then I read One Dark Window by Rachel Gillig. This I gave 4 out of 5 stars. This is the first book in the Shepherd King duet, and this follows Elsbeth, who has an ancient spirit locked inside her mind. She calls him the Nightmare. He keeps her safe, but after an encounter with a dangerous highwayman, her life takes a drastic turn. She teams up with the highwayman, who turns out to be the king's nephew, to save the kingdom from the dangerous magic. This is a very interesting book. It has a very kind of complex magic system, sort of, I guess. I was definitely confused for like probably the first 50 to 100 pages, but after the characters attended the equinox, I feel like I was totally on board, and then I was fully understanding like what was going on. I loved Elsbeth. I thought she was a fantastic heroine. It was really interesting to get to know her and to get to know the Nightmare. I loved the Nightmare. I also think like the Providence cards, the magic cards in here was very interesting. That is like how people have magic, is if they have these specific cards, they can control people, read people's minds, disappear. The magic cards were just very interesting. I loved the little gang that we kind of got. We kind of got like a little Scooby gang, which was fun. I loved the romance that was developing here between Elsbeth and I think it's Raven. The ending was very intense, very crazy, like a wild ride. I loved it. And I then obviously immediately picked up the second book, Two Twisted Crowns. The second book I gave 5 out of 5 stars. I loved this so much. I also cried so hard at the end of this book. I just thought like the ending was so beautiful, and all of the revelations, the plot twists, the whole story in general was so interesting. It was so fascinating. I loved the small hints that the author put throughout both books and the revelation that kind of came on towards the end. It was a little jarring at first to kind of get used to 3 POVs. So the first book is in Elsbeth's point of view, and then the second book is in Elsbeth's, Raven's, and Elm's point of view. So you have kind of 3 different stories kind of going on, sort of. So that was a little jarring for me at first, because I was like, okay, we're now like in the minds of 3 people. And at times it kind of felt like it was no longer Elsbeth's story, which made me a little sad, but I did enjoy the direction of this book. I liked the little romance that was happening for Elm. That was great. I loved that aspect. I just loved all of the revelations for the Nightmare and that whole story and the history and everything to do with the spirit of the wood. That was just so interesting. Like, I just really loved the way that this author wrote the final book and closed everything, wrapped everything up. I just thought it was fantastic, and I highly, highly recommend this duology. It was just so good. I just realized I didn't start my October books. I kind of just went through all of them, but Halfling, Immortal Dark, and The Serpent of the Wings of Night are the 3 books I read in September, and then everything else I have read in October. And the last book I read in October was Queen of Myth and Monsters by Scarlett St. Clair. This is the second book in the Adrian and Isidole series. This I gave 2.5 out of 5 stars. This picks up immediately after the first book. I can't really say what this is about, but it continues to follow Adrian and Isidole. I initially picked this up because I thought this was a duology. I genuinely thought that there was just only 2 books in the series, but that is not true. This, I think, is going to be at least a trilogy, might even be a series. The next book is supposed to come out, I think, next year. I don't really know, but I was mistaken. It's not a duology, and the only reason I read this second book is because I thought it was a duology and I just wanted to wrap up the duology, but it's not a duology. I will not be continuing with this series. I just didn't enjoy the second book enough to continue. Like, I enjoyed the first book more than this second book. I just felt like the plot and the overall storylines and everything that was going on in this book just kind of felt all over the place, and it felt like there was no clear, real direction for where this series is going to go. A lot of characters got backstories in this book, which was interesting, but I really wish that would have happened in the first book because it felt like this should have been like the first book. You know what I mean? Like there were parts of this book that should have been in the first book, not in a sequel. I felt like this book was quite repetitive a lot. The plot and like the development between characters or like situation between characters felt very repetitive. I felt like there was no real progress made in this book. Yeah, everything was kind of all over the place in this book. The relationship between characters, the plots, more of the world building kind of fell apart for me. I don't know, I just didn't really enjoy the second book that much. Like I was enjoying the beginning part of this book, and then it kind of went in this weird direction. I was like, maybe I'm not enjoying this. So I gave it 2.5 out of 5 stars. I have A Touch of Darkness, which I think is the first book in her other series. So I'm definitely going to check out that one, but I won't continue this series. And then quickly we'll go through my soft DNF. So in my fall reading plans video, I said that I was going to pause on my TBR jar picks and I was going to read Dracula and Frankenstein in September and October. I did not read Dracula. I didn't even start it. I decided not to pick it up because I was going to read Frankenstein in September and then Dracula for October, but I decided to soft DNF Frankenstein. I was just not in the mood to read this, and I feel like this is a book that you really need to pay attention to. You really need to absorb every single word. I got to, I think, page like maybe 35 or something like that. It's a short book, so I do feel bad that like I didn't finish this, but I'm gonna soft DNF it and get back to it at a later time. I don't want to like completely discard it because I do want to eventually read this. I just was not in the right mind frame, and I just wanted to read other like intense fantasy, fast-paced kind of reads, and this is not really that. You have to like fully pay attention and read everything to really understand what's going on. The end of September came around and I hadn't finished this. So I was like, you know what? I'll just read it. I'll finish it in October. And I just didn't get around to it. So yeah, it's going to be a soft DNF for now. And maybe next September or October, I'll get around to it. So those were all the books that I read in September and October. Let me know if you have read any of the books that I talked about or what you've read in the last 2 months. Thank you so much for watching. Make sure to give this video a like, subscribe, follow me on all my other social media, and I will see you in my next one. Bye.